17 minutes. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'd move we approve the minutes of the July 25th meeting.
And second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. The minutes are approved from the last meeting. Now we move on to decision items. Our first decision item is a request for a special permit by Silver Lake Estates, Inc. to allow filling upon the property within an R2 1 and 2 family residence district located west of 18 Silver Lake Drive. Do we have a staff report?
This is Andero staff. This is a request by Silver Lakes Estates for a special permit to allow for clean fill upon their site. Request would not appear to have a negative impact upon the surrounding neighborhood or land use, and it would not appear to have a negative impact upon pedestrian or vehicular traffic in the area. Area in question is zoned R2, 1 and 2 family residence district, and has been zoned as such since the adoption of the zoning ordinance in 1969. Surrounding land uses and their zoning are as follows. To the north, vacant development ground and single-family uses along East Shawless Road, zoned A1 Ag District. South, single-family houses zoned R2, 1 and 2 family residence district. East is unincorporated Blackhawk County, zoned A Agricultural District. And west is vacant development ground and single-family uses along Folk Road, zoned A1 Agricultural District. Property is located within the Zone AE 100-year floodplain, as indicated by FEMA flood insurance rate map. Applicant is requesting approval of a special permit to establish a fill site to bring in clean fill to create a berm to prevent Silver Lake Drive from washing out, as it has done in the past. The toe of the berm ranges from 831.6 feet to as high as 835.4 feet along Silver Lake Drive, which is approximately 1 to 20 slope. Overall, the proposed fill for the site is 220 cubic yards. Based on the current land elevations of many different contours and a more gradual plan, it does not appear that the fill request would negatively impact the area. The applicant's engineer has submitted a letter and additional information indicating that the berm would not have a negative impact on flooding conditions in the area. With the designation of a clean fill site, the applicant must abide by the regulations set forth by Blackhawk County Health Department and may need to submit a rubble site application, corresponding fee and cash bond and surety bond, a plan detailing what fill is to be used and what the elevation of the area to be filled is to the health department. There is an underground electrical line owned by Mid-American Energy along the north side of Silver Lake Drive where the new berm is located. And staff has had discussion with Mid-American Energy, and the clean fill will not negatively impact that underground line due to there being no cutting of the ground taking place. Staff is aware and has received calls from multiple residents in the area that have expressed concerns with the berm and that it will have a negative impact upon flooding conditions and it could push water onto their property. At the August 1st, 2017 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, the commission voted to deny the request for the berm 4-3. The request is compliant with all flood regulations, and there would not appear to be a valid reason to deny the request at hand. Therefore, staff recommends that the request for special permit to allow for clean fill be approved for the following reasons. Would not appear to have a negative impact upon the surrounding area. Request would not appear to have a negative impact upon pedestrian traffic conditions in the area. With the request is in conformance with the future land use map, which designates this area as low-density residential. And 4, the proposed fill will not negatively impact Mid-America's underground electrical line along the north side of Silver Lake Drive, as the applicant is not cutting into the ground with the new fill.
Thank you, Mr. Andrea. Is there any questions from the board for staff?
I have a question.
Mr. Condon?
And maybe it's a question for the applicant, I don't know which. The berm has been started. Has it been finished? Or is there more to do?
I believe there's a little bit more to do, but the applicant could probably better address that than I could.
All right.
I have a question for staff. The Planning and Zoning Commission voted to deny the request for the berm, so why is it coming to us?
This is a special permit. They only recommend, and this is recommendation to you from the Planning Commission
we
for the
only go
special
off
permit.
their recommendation, but we can go whichever way we see
But
fit.
staff's
right?
recommending that we approve it.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
Another question, or I guess more of a comment. FEMA is not involved then, my understanding is. they do not have to give approval, their blessing, anything like they do,
Right.
like over in Summerland where there's some houses in the,
If you submit a fill plan in the 100-year floodplain, it can be approved.
okay, this is not a
Local, on a
floodplain
local
as what-
level.
As a flood, this isn't a floodway,
Right. This is floodplain, 100-year floodplain.
what's the difference?
Floodway would be the area that would be inundated first during a flood, and it is the most restrictive portion of the floodplain where you cannot build anything at. Whereas you can construct structures in the 100-year floodplain and bring fill in.
This area, there's no structures, there's no homes or where we're talking here.
Where the berm is?
Right.
Correct.
Any other questions for staff? No? Okay, at this time, we will allow anyone in the audience to come up and speak. We ask that you give your name and address, please, and keep your comments to under 3 minutes.
Can you plug that in? It's a USB thumb drive. My name's Kirk Ashleman. I'm with Kess and Associates. We're the ones that have been doing the elevation measurements like that. Partially to answer your question regarding FEMA. Several houses, this is in what's referred to as the floodplain. Floodway, actually, the reason FEMA has rules against it is considered where they still have flow. And so that's why the floodway is kind of a red flag. If you're in it, don't even think about doing anything. Floodplain, several of the houses in this area have been removed and are being removed from the flood insurance requirements, so. Okay,
It's over there.
can you bring up that topo map first? Okay, these photos that we've got here, that one in particular, that's looking from this very area that we're talking about. You can see that they haven't even started to sandbag along Silver Lake Road. The houses in the background are the ones along Folk Road. They're already underwater. That during the 2008 flood, 2011, this water was already substantially deep. It did not crest until June 12th. In this particular area, it came up a little bit slower because we're on the downstream end of it. It should also be noted that
Mr. Ashland, this would be looking to the north.
you're on the
northwest.
north looking southwest.
Okay.
This is 2008.
This is 2008 photography.
Okay.
Okay, next one. Okay, this is looking up Folk Road. You can see the water. This is before it got as deep as it was in that other photo. Basically, it's just above curb to curb on both sides as you go up the roadway there. Next one. Hmm?
I think that's it.
Go back up to the first one, then it's a topo file. Yeah, there. You zoom back out a little bit so we can see the whole thing. What you're looking at right there is you're looking at the north extension of Folk Road to the left. That diagonal in the upper right is the railroad. Now, as you come down across there, you're going to notice that, yes, we cross Shawless Road. And if you look to the west of Folk Road, south of Shawless, to the extreme left of the drawing, there's several channels that have been cut in that field. The drainage goes from south to north in this entire area. That water flows up towards Shawless, works its way under the road and ends up working into the Sink Creek Basin. That's the flood basin we're dealing with here. Now, as you look to the right of the photo, what is a backwater bog from when the river decided to change its path, and it left a lake in there. That's to the north and east of the Silver Lake area. And that's where a lot of the water from this area drains to.
I grew up out there,
As did I.
and the water in that area comes from two different directions, from
Correct.
what I remember. Some of it backs up from the river. If you go across Shawless on Falk down toward the river, some of it backs up there. The lake, which would be east, I guess, of this area, it gets its water clear down toward Leiden Road, where it backs up from the river. And follows a creek into a pond, into the lake, over to
Basically,
that area.
everything east and north of the intersection of Shawless at Whedon Road, that is in the floodway.
Right.
The other thing you're looking at is you can see the lake itself. You can see the drive around it. I'd like to bring attention to the fact that if you look at the contours, the ground south of there, and we included the cul-de-sac on the development south of there, you can see how many lines there are on that topo. That water flows from the south to the north.
Silver Lake doesn't get any water out of the Cedar. It's a quarry, as I recall.
It's a quarry, but there is a sandy aquifer underlaying that, which is why the water started coming up during 2008. Silver Lake didn't have issues with the lake water until after it was already going down for everybody else. Do you understand what I'm saying? That it takes a while for it to go through the ground. Well, it was already coming, and then it went back the other way. Yeah, move that up. You're looking at the north end. You can see the contours where they show basically the biggest obstruction right there is where they put the overburden around Silver Lake, which ended up becoming where they built the houses and built the road. And that driveway going on out to Folk Road literally cuts off the flow from the south to the north. And so basically you're looking at the access drive. There is the end of anything that can come from around the northeast heading out to the west. I know it was brought up before, and now it was kind of emotional that people did get water in their basements on Folk Road. Where it came from in the first place wasn't even the flood. It's when the city lost power to their sanitary sewer lift station north of Shawless Road on Folk Road. And so it wasn't pumping sewage anymore. That's why they ended up sewage in their basements. So this situation didn't even add anything to it. Now, I know there was a question you had, Tim, about the fill. And, okay,
I had the question, is this berm completed now?
it's not completed because they were issued a stop work order.
How much?
All the dirt is there. It just needs to be graded down so they can mow it, seed it and mow it.
So in your expert opinion, are you saying that with the berm, it's not gonna add to the flooding problems that the neighbors already face?
That's correct. Because what's happened over there already in the 2008, thank God those don't happen very often. But that flood condition, yes, the water came around the fill that makes up Silver Lake Drive. And it came up in their backyards, but that's where the backwater was rising and appears to flow around that way. Once it got as deep as it was going, it's like that one photo showed. The road, Silver Lake Road, didn't have any fill then, didn't have any sandbags then, and yet they were already underwater. So the conditions that exist there aren't going to be affected.
But the completion of the berm would,
Protect the
protect
road, the
from
road itself, and some of the homes
some of those homes.
that are along there that have walkout basements. That was one of the issues that was cleared with getting a couple of those out of the flood control, was that they turned around and put a berm in around the low side of the house where the walkout was. And that got them above the floodplain.
Is there any more questions for Mr. Eichelman?
Yeah, Kurt?
Yes.
Will the height of the berm be outside the floodplain then? Or will it still be below the floodplain level? The 100-year?
The berm itself, as shown with the road, is already above
Okay,
the 1% event, the so-called 100-year event.
all right.
Yeah, I tried to look it up, and FEMA and DNR have refused to rate the 2008 flood yet.
Any more questions for Mr. Eichelman? No? All right. Thank you, Mr. Eichelman.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else in the crowd that would like to speak for or against this matter?
Pete Christensen, 5147 Falk Road. I know we're here again. We did this 3 weeks ago. It
That was
seems,
with a different board, Mr. Christensen, so.
pardon?
That was with a different board.
Correct. But we're going through the same situation. They want to put a dike in, and we don't want it. We feel it's going to cause us more problems. Anytime you divert water, it's, from there especially, it's going to be in our backyards. We had enough of it in '08 and a little bit in '06. Our concern is why do they want this berm in the first place? To keep it out of the lake? Or to make it easier mowing? The mowing part, they've been doing it for 40 years, the way it was before. So I can't understand why this is being done to start with. I kind of go along with planning and zoning. If they voted no, they must have a reason for saying it's not a good idea. So that's where we're coming from, a lot of us on Falk Road, some on Shawless. Because it affects us. If you change water, the direction of it, it's not good for those people downstream. That'd be us. I guess that's all I've got to say.
Thank you,
Any
Mr.
questions?
Christensen. Anyone else in the audience that would like to speak for or against this matter?
Yes, please. James Cook, 2 Silver Lake Drive. The complaints of the neighbors on Folk are the same today as they were before planning and zoning, and they lack any support. The argument, as I understand, is that they believe that it will change the flow of the flood water. There is no engineering support for that, as evidenced by Mr. Eschman's report. The photographic evidence this board has seen shows that those people, unfortunately, were flooded in their basements from sewer backup, and their backyards were already flooded before the water even reached the top of the existing roadway. The historic background for this is that in '08, when the flood levels did reach the roadway. And those people were completely inundated by that point. We sandbagged the arc of the road that is now represented by the berm so as to prevent, number one, further damage to the roadway by undermining that structure, and intrusion of water across the roadway into the lake, because the lake was already rising and threatening those homes that had basement walkouts. There was no complaint when we sandbagged, and last fall, when the predictions were that the river would crest at a level even higher than '08, we started to sandbag again. We only have 11 homes around the lake, and that's an awfully large area to sandbag. So that was the decision at which the association said, well, let's put in the functional equivalent of sandbags on a permanent basis so we don't have to do this again. And that was the genesis of the berm idea. Because if the board looks at the dimensions, and Mr. Eshelman can confirm this, the height of that berm is no higher than what we would sandbag that road. And I really don't think that these folks would say, if we had that event again, that we couldn't sandbag the road. It's not doing anything different from sandbagging. It's just making it a more permanent structure so we don't have to engage in that activity one more time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak for or against this matter?
Yeah, I'm Ron Geisler, 5129 Falk Road. And one thing I want to say, these people are not our enemies, but they're also our neighbors. We understand their problem. We also have the same problem. And in '08, we were flooded quite badly. And our water does come through our backyards. Our backyard backs right up to the Silver Lake property. And it comes from that way, and if you remember from the pictures, we were told that in this picture, we were already flooded. And then they also showed a picture of the front of our houses, and the water was only curb high out there. So you know the water has to be coming from the back toward us. We really don't need any more water coming from that direction. And also, they've already said that they did not get water over the top. I don't know why we're calling this a berm anyhow, because in my mind, it's a dike, and a dike is to hold water back. And it appears to me that that is what's happening here. But they said they didn't get any water from the dike. They got their water from hydraulicking up through the lake. Once the water went down, the lake did come up, and that is when they had their problems. So if they didn't get it in 2008, when it was, 27 feet, their record, why do we need to make this berm higher now? So I'm very much against it. I don't know, is that gonna actually put more water towards us? Is there anybody in here who really can say yes or no? But if they build the berm up and we get lesser water and we get flooded worse, who do we go to? So I'm really confused about that part of it, but I would hope that we don't change anything out there to make it possibly worse. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. Geisler. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak for or against this matter? A second time? Anyone else in the audience?
I would like to add that photo that he's pointing to.
Mr. Eichler, can I have you come to the microphone, please?
This isn't showing the dates on the photography. There's roughly 5 days between that photo in their front yard and the one in their backyard.
You don't have a date on the other photo either.
Pardon? It's on the file. It's just not showing up on the screen.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience that would like to speak for or against this matter? Second time? Seeing no other comments, I would bring it back to the board for any further discussion, questions, or a motion.
I have a question.
Okay.
I'm not sure, what is it exactly that we are, if we read this staff recommendation for the approval, what is it that we're approving? I'm not sure that it's clear.
Eric Schrader, city planner. So the fact that this property is in a Zone A 1% chance, formerly referred to as the 100-year floodplain, is not the reason that this request is before you for a special permit.
Understand that?
Any property in the city of Waterloo, including those outside of a floodplain, if you propose to bring in more than 25 cubic yards of fill material, that fill material either has to be approved as part of an approved development plan or absent an approved overall development plan for an area. If you're just bringing in 25 cubic yards of material or more, must obtain a special permit for rubble fill or clean fill approval, whether it's rubble fill or not. The main types of uses that get that are more what's considered the true rubble fills, where they've got a low spot and they're bringing in concrete or other rubble material just to fill an area, and they have to provide a plan that shows existing contour, proposed contour, and information on the amount of cubic yards of fill material. We haven't typically seen these for this type of a berm type structure, but it still applies. They have brought in more than 25 cubic yards of material. It's not part of an approved fill approval development plan, so therefore has to go through the special permit approval process. And then from the floodplain regulation standpoint, as was already discussed, there's what's the floodway and then the floodplain. This is not in a floodway. No fill or structures are allowed in a floodway, but this is not in a designated floodway. In the floodplain, fill is not prohibited. It would just have to otherwise be approved as part of a development plan or fill special permit for a fill approval like this. And we have plenty of other instances where fill in the floodplain has been authorized either as part of a overall development plan, like out in the Martin Road Industrial Park area, south of Ridgeway, west of 63, or other areas that have been in a floodplain and have gone through the special permit, southeast corner of it's right across from Hawkeye Community College, and I'm forgetting the actual street intersections there, where it was partially in a floodplain and they went through the rubble fill approval process to bring that portion out of the floodway up so that it could be developed, but had to not place any fill in the floodway portion of it.
Okay, but that's really not my question. I mean, that's
Okay.
good background, but
Okay, I guess
my
restate it
question
and I'll try
really
and answer
is,
it.
they're asking for a special permit to do what? To
Bring in
not to do any more fill? That would be part of our approval, that they couldn't bring any more fill in? They could only grade what they have?
Well, that would certainly be up to the board, and the applicant or the applicant's engineer might be able to address that more. It's my understanding that what they've submitted an application for, it lists the number as at 220, I think 220 cubic yards of fill material is what they're asking for approval of. I am not sure if what's already been brought in constitutes that 220. I know that for the most part, the fill material has been brought in. There's just needs to do some kind of finalized grading so that it can be properly seeded and mowable. I know the applicant at one time talked about that they might need a little bit more, and the applicant can certainly address that if there's a little bit more fill material that hasn't been brought in, and if that's covered by the 220 cubic yards of fill material that they're asking for the approval for.
Can any of the applicants, can you?
Like, I guess that's my question is, is our approval or whatever, if we do approve it, are we saying that they can't The way it's worded is, they could almost do anything, to me. As
If-
long as it.
If
was
it's
kind of
approved
in
as
that
requested, it would be limited to both 220 cubic yards, and it would be limited to as provided in the plan, which shows, you know, the existing and proposed contours of the site, so.
We don't know how much is already in there.
Sir, the 220 yards is on site already, but it's in piles, so it needs to be spread out.
Basically,
And basically, it,
asking forgiveness, not permission.
and that,
Go back
and
to that.
the other part is the berm will be, the top of the berm, as shown on the plan, shows an elevation of 6 inches over the top of the asphalt.
Mr. Chairman, I have a comment, which I grew up in this area. My feeling is anyone that has purchased a home or built a home, anything out in this area, knowing that it is in a flood problem area, I don't know what the designation is for sure, but they've taken on that responsibility, and that goes with the property. My experience is you change the flow of water, it may not bother anything today, tomorrow, or the next day, but the next time it could. And I've seen it. There wasn't really any big flood problems out there until Waterloo built its dike system. And I grew up out there in the 50s and 60s and lived out there in the 70s even. But that's my experience, and that's how I'll be voting on it. But I just haven't been convinced that this is the right way of doing it. I think it's gonna stop the water from going across that road, but I don't know what it's gonna do to the rest of the area.
Will the board accept one more comment?
Sure.
Thank you. James Cook again, 2 Silver Lake Drive. Addressing committee member Schmidt's comments.
Bryce.
I would remind this board that if this matter should be reviewed by a judicial body, the standard review that applies to this board is that it must make its decision based upon what the evidence shows, what can be supported by the applicant, and not by speculation or mere emotional pleas by neighboring properties. And the only evidence in front of this board is that there is no effect and will be no effect on the flow of water as a result of the construction of this berm. There's no engineering evidence, there's no hydrologic evidence. And I would urge the board to keep that in mind.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Any further discussion from the board? Yes, ma'am.
I'm Barb Culbertson from 5061 Folk Road. And as I've been out there since 1961, farther up the road, and then rebuilt when we adopted our second daughter in 1968 to the location I'm at now. And we watched that water come up through that field. And that's how we determine what is going to happen to us. The more fill that is brought in there, I don't care how tall it is. I mean, they're saying it hasn't been leveled out yet. But the more fill that's brought in that's not tall is going to push that water up on us. And that's very concerning because I have watched this for many years.
Thank you, Ms. Culbertson.
Thank you.
Any further discussion from the board?
call.
Excuse me, but we were not in the floodplain when we built the houses. It was never rated as a floodplain. We were never insured as a floodplain.
Eric Schrader, city planner. That is true, but that's because there was no such thing as a floodplain system at that point in time. The flood study for Blackhawk County happened in the 70s, and the official floodplain map, the first official floodplain map for the city of Waterloo, was adopted in 1983 or 5. So it's, I mean, you weren't in a floodplain because there was no such thing as a floodplain officially at that point in time. That's not to say you weren't in an area that had the potential to flood. It just was not officially studied and officially in a designated floodplain.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or a motion from the board?
I'll make a motion. I make a motion that we approve the request for a special permit to allow for a clean fill site to be approved and subject to the site plan as proposed, the proposed site plan. For the following reason, the request would not appear to have a negative impact on the surrounding area. The request would not appear to have a negative impact upon pedestrian and traffic conditions within the surrounding area and proper traffic control measures. The request is conformant with the future land use map and comprehensive plan for this area, which designates it as low-density residential. Proposed fill does not negatively impact Mid-America's underground electric lines along the north side of Silver Lake Drive. Period.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Why don't we do a roll call vote on this? This is, by the way, a yes does signify that it stays, and no,
Approval of the special permit.
yep, approval of the special permit, correct?
Condon,
Yes.
Goldsberry,
Yes.
Reisinger,
No,
Chimp,
No.
Cheezick,
That passes 3-2.
I'd just like my comment put in the minutes that we shouldn't be doing this after the fact. I mean, that berm should not have been put in there. It causes nothing but problems if you have to take them back out. So that's my only comment.
Thank you, Mr. Reisinger. All right, we are on to item number 2, which is a request by Steve Drost for a variance to the 2,560 square foot accessory structure limit, the 15-foot maximum. We'll go ahead if anyone would like to leave the chambers. All right, on.
Sorry, that's my wife's thumb drive.
Sure, blame her.
All right, thank you, sir. Item number 2 is a request by Steve Drost for a variance to the 2,560 square foot accessory structure limit, the 15-foot maximum height limit, and restrictions on the use of vertical metal siding to allow for the construction of a 2,400 square foot pole building for a total of 5,040 square foot off accessory structures, 2,480 square foot over the maximum, and to allow for the height of 20 foot, 5 foot greater than the 15-foot maximum, and allow the use of vertical metal siding in the R2 1 and 2 family residence district located at 1445 Arbor Lane. Do we have a staff report on that?
this is Western with staff. The property is located on private street Arbor Lane, just west of Maywood Avenue and Butler Avenue. The site in question is Zone R2, 1 and 2 Family Residence District, and has been zoned as such since the adoption of the zoning ordinance. Properties to the north, south, east, and west are also Zone R2, 1 and 2 Family Residence District. The applicant constructed a new home on the site in question in 2013, and as a part of that use, planned to build a 40 by 64 or 2,560 square foot pole building, existing pole building to use as a shop and cold storage. The applicant received the variance in 2013 to construct the 40 by 64 pole building to allow the building to utilize allow the building to utilize vertical steel siding and to have a height of 20 feet and to place the pole building in the required front yard. Staff felt it was acceptable to allow for the structure to exceed the 1,800 square foot maximum in this particular area, as the lot in question is approximately 13 acres. The applicant owns the adjoining 13.74 acre parcel for a total of a lot area of 27.5 acres. Due to the larger size of the lot and the distance the new structure would be from the property lines, staff felt that it would not appear that the structure would be out of character with the surrounding area and could make the request somewhat unique. The applicant is now requesting a variance to the 2,560 square foot accessory structure limit, the 15-foot maximum height limit, and restrictions on the use of vertical metal siding to allow for the construction of a 2,400 square foot pole building for a total of 5,040 square feet of accessory structures, 2,480 square feet over the maximum, and to allow for the height greater than 15 feet maximum to allow for a 20-foot tall building, 5 feet taller than the maximum allowed, and allow the use of vertical metal siding in the R2, 1 and 2 Family Residence District. The request could have a negative impact on the surrounding area, as it would allow for a significantly larger accessory building with vertical metal siding to be associated with a single-family residential use. The request could also have a negative impact with the surrounding area, as allowance of the building to exceed the height limit of 15 feet may set precedent, although a variance already has been granted to allow one building on the property to exceed 15 feet. There are some metal-type pole buildings within the surrounding area. However, it would appear that they were constructed prior to the adoption of the provision that restricted vertical metal siding on detached structures associated with residential structures in 2004. It should be noted that this area could potentially be developed for future housing, and if this occurs, this could open visibility to the proposed structure. Staff believes that the allowance to utilize vertical metal siding to exceed the maximum accessory square feet by 2,400 square feet, 480 square feet, and to allow for the height greater than 15 feet maximum would be out of character with the surrounding area, as the majority of the detached structures are sided with siding that is conducive with a residential use. Criteria: lack of reasonable return. There would not appear to be a lack of reasonable return to the request, as the applicant could construct a new building just big enough to store the motorhome in, utilize siding conducive to a residential dwelling, and construct the building at the maximum height of 15 feet. Uniqueness: there appears to be a uniqueness to the request. The structure would sit on is 27.5 acres in area, and due to the larger lot size, the structure would sit a great amount of distance from surrounding property lines and would appear to have minimal visibility from the surrounding area. The area is also heavily wooded, screening the building from most adjoining properties. Public considerations: there are no objections on file for the request. Staff recommends that the request by Steve Drosty for a variance to the 2,560 square foot accessory structure limit, the 15-foot maximum height limit, and restrictions on the use of vertical metal siding to allow for the construction of a 2,400 square foot pole building for a total of 5,040 square feet of accessory structures, 2,480 square feet over the maximum, and to allow for a height greater than 15 feet maximum, and allow the use of vertical metal siding in the R2, 1 and 2 Family Residence District, located at 1445 Arbor Lane be denied for the following reasons. The request for the variances would appear to set precedent. The applicant would appear to have other options that would not require issuance of a variance. The proposed total 5,040 square feet of accessory structure would appear excessive for a single-family home, regardless of the lot size, location, and limited visibility.
All right, thank you, Mr. Western. Are there any questions for staff from the board?
I have one question. Under the lack of reasonable return, you talked about that he could build something to store his motorhome, but he'd still be in excess of the square feet for accessory buildings, wouldn't he?
Correct, but it sounded like there was, the building's being built, overbuilt, it sounds like, and the applicant can clarify that later, to store more than just the motorhome. So perhaps if you could downscale the motorhome or the building to do just, you'd still be over, you're correct.
Isn't the
But
current building that he has big enough for the motorhome? That was built.
the existing building is being used for a race cars and working on race cars.
Excuse me. Any more questions for staff? No? Anyone in the audience that would like to speak for or against this? Please give us your name and address, sir.
Yes, my name's Steve Drosty, 1445 Arbor Lane. One of the reasons we're looking at trying to do this is, the building we have there right now, the majority of that we did build for, my son races cars, we're kind of into cars, the whole family has been for years, kind of doing that thing, and so the shop we have, the place we have now is primarily used, we've got a little bit of cold storage in that, but it's primarily used for a race car shop. We do that with it. I guess a couple of the things, like I said, there is 27 acres there. It is split into two parcels, mainly because when we bought this property, we were going to split it up and sell half. Actually, the person that we went in on it with was going to split this up. So we had it all, the acreage split in half. And the other person that was going to purchase the other part of it, they couldn't sell a house they had. It was in a floodplain, so they kind of backed out of it. So we've decided since then after that, not to really sell the other portion of it anyway. We had it split up for that purpose and decided not to. Part of the reason, like I say, we wanted to do this, unfortunately, we do have quite a few cars around, vehicles around. We're into other car things as well. But I do have a 40-foot motorhome that I'd like to be able to get in out of the winter, even during the summertime. And unfortunately, you drive by there, people can't see it anyway. It's a big U-shaped entrance that goes in there. I have a friend of mine that lives up the road that I've known since childhood that lives up in the Maywood area. He said he drove by there. He didn't realize there was a house back there because you can see the pole building that's there now. You can see that if you drive by. The rest of the property is pretty much covered by trees and stuff. You really can't hardly see in there or see past it. Where this building would be located is back into the woods a little bit where it would virtually not be detectable at all because of the woods. Like I say, there's 28 acres there, almost 28 acres. There's about 2 acres there that have been cleared out. The rest of it is, there's one area down below that's just been kind of a grassy area down there. There's no trees in. But other than that, all of it is a wooded area. We've actually got it set up in a forest reserve, that type of thing. We don't plan on, doing any other building or selling, lots or anything. I know initially years ago a few years back when we bought this, there was a housing development kind of in the plans they had streets and things that just never took off. We enjoy it the way it is. Like I said, part of the reason we've got a 32-foot trailer. We've got a 40-foot motorhome that we haul these things with. But like a little additional storage also. Like I say, even the height of it and everything, like I say, nothing would really be detectable. If you look at the thing you had up there, I've got a couple of other pictures, but basically the whole area there, where it would be at. And like you mentioned, I know some of these things were up there before, probably before some of the new laws come into effect, but there is this whole area. I grew up on Independence Avenue, just up the street from there all my life, and this area up there has always been kind of, they're not regimented lots and things like that where everything's kind of set in place. There are people up there. There has been pole buildings up there for years, and I guess like to be able to put an additional one up. One of the other things, I guess, one of the things, unfortunately for me, is we've got a lot of vehicles around. It doesn't look good there sometimes when people do pull in there because there's vehicles around. It's almost hard to get around, even though we've got a big driveway and everything. I like to be able to, be able to get those out of sight, out of mind a little bit, and I think this would be less intrusive than some of the vehicles sitting around there sometimes. So.
Thank you, Mr. Drost.
Yep.
Anyone else in the audience that would like to speak for or against? Second time? No? Okay. Bring it back to the board for discussion and a possible motion.
Are we, if we were to approve this, are we setting any precedents with this large of secondary building?
Eric Schrader, city planner. It certainly could be. That's certainly some concern. There's definitely, when you review precedent, you kind of look at, requests are going to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis, but when there are comparables, that's where if I have a similar situation and you granted something there, then that's where it'll potentially set precedent on another situation. And there certainly are some uniquenesses with this request, giving the extreme, large lot size associated with it, its location generally kind of on the fringe of the city and more of a rural area, very heavily wooded, screening it fairly well from view. So there are some certain uniquenesses, but that's kind of the underlying question and concern is essentially that precedent issue and that what exactly is a limit of a reasonable amount of square footage for one single family home to have for accessory buildings, which the definition of accessory is incidental and clearly, accessory and clearly incidental to the primary use of the property as a residence. And, that's the question is over 5,000 square feet of detached accessory structures reasonable regardless of the lot size when associated to a single family home. And that's what we're having a little bit of concern on. The request previously got a variance because of the max of 1,800. They built the pole building. It was also granted the variance for the height and the vertical metal siding. So if the board is to grant an additional variance to size, I think the precedent's already there for this site in particular regarding the height and the siding. Staff has always tended to oppose variances to the siding, but there certainly has been ones that have been approved, including one right on this site. So we really don't necessarily have a ton of concern regarding the height part of the request or the siding part of the request. Ultimately, it gets down to the reasonableness of the total square footage of size, and it might, the question was on if it's being overbuilt and what size is really needed. So I think it might be good for the applicant to kind of address that. But would a smaller addition to the existing pole building, for instance, allow for sufficient room to just get the camper in there without such an excessive amount of total accessory square footage?
Mr. Drost, is that a possibility?
Is that yeah.
It really, where the present pole building sits, there's really no way, about 10 foot off the side of one side, right, not even that far, runs right into our driveway already. So we'd have to build into the driveway on the one end. The other end really starts, if you went out the other way or out to the back of it, there's actually kind of a wetlands back there from the back side of it. It's wet back there that never dries up from the tile that runs through under our driveway. And it's always been, even before that, it's always been wet. So that's not mowable. You can't really go back. And the other way, then it starts going right into the view of our house itself. Or if you go the other way, then you're looking outside and all of a sudden it starts blocking the house view completely also. So it really isn't, I understand you guys' objections up, but there really isn't any way to go anywhere with the other buildings that's presently there.
What's the least you can live with if you were to build a second building?
It's